So Harman Photo, aka Ilford, made their first colour film recently. Now the only reason you would not know that is if you were somehow living under a rock for the last few weeks, as every film YouTuber in the world seemed to get a test roll. But not me. Phoenix 200 is a new, and I mean new, as in actually new colour film, built from the ground up. This is not a respool of some old stock or some DREM jetted Kodak Vision 3 stock. This is actually a brand new colour film. And what's even more amazing is that this is Harman's first colour film. Yes, the guys that only make black and white film just across the Irish Sea from me made a colour film. And even though they are just across a small sea, I didn't get sent any for testing. Now you might ask why this is called Harman Phoenix and not Ilford. Well, the short answer is complex corporate usage trademarks and stuff like that after the film collapsed. Anyway, who cares about that? I want to see the film. So this is a 200 ISO colour negative film that is developed in the C41 process, so it can be processed by pretty much any developing or photo lab. And so now that we know all that, we can go shoot a roll. The first thing I noticed after developing is the lack of an orange mask. The base of this film is a purple colour like XP2. And this makes sense because this film is built on top of XP2, which itself is a C41 film, but instead of using different colour dyes to make a colour image, it uses a black dye to make a black and white image. And how do I know it was built on top of XP2? Well, it was mentioned in Jason unpronounceable last name, aka grainydays' interview with the guys at Harman. Now, to develop my own roll of this film, I used Fuji C41 5-litre kit using my Jobo and the normal developing time of 3 minutes 15 at 38C. Now, when it came to scanning this film, I looked at the different results online and they vary wildly with scans all over the shop. So I scanned the film using my scanning rig with the Coolscan lens and a D850 with the negative supply 99 CRI light and their 35mm carrier. Now before I start scanning any film, I set the camera white balance through the unexposed leader as I do for all colour negative films in order to neutralise the orange base colour, or in this case the purple base colour. Now before we look at some scans, we need to temper our expectations. This is a proof of concept film and a first attempt by Harman. Harman is not going to be able to make something on their first go that's equal to Kodak Gold, which has decades and decades of improvements and development behind it. As far as I understand, this film is meant to be a jumping off point for future colour films from Harman. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some scans. So looking at some scans, we can see that this is an experimental film through and through. In this first shot of the deer, we can see two very obvious things with this film. It has a low dynamic range, very close to reversal film, and it has unapologetically aggressive grain. Now what's interesting is if you develop the film in the E6 process, the grain comes out much finer. And how do I know about this? Well, my friend Shaka1277, aka Alex, cross-prosed the film and got some really interesting results. This is from his video on it where he went way more in depth on this, so make sure to check out his video on this. Also, there is a lot of halation with this film, or well, there's a lot on other people's shots that I've seen. I only have a small amount of halation in one shot because of Ireland's natural anti-halation weather. It's December, it's grey as fuck right now, okay? Now also when I was shooting this film, I bracketed the shots one stop over and under at 200 ISO to see how the film handles different exposure levels. So if we look at the one stop underexposed shots, aka shot at 400 ISO, we can see that this film does not like underexposure at all. Any shadow detail just falls straight through the event horizon to hell and back. Now if we take a look at the shots at 100 ISO, they look much better to my eyes than the ISO 200 shots, and this aligns with information from Harman, where they said the mathematical ISO of the film is 125. And looking at these, it does seem to be a tiny bit overexposed to me as well, so 125 appears to check out. Also, the grain in the ISO 100 shots appears to be a little bit finer, but not much. Now this film also has a very narrow dynamic range. It appears to be small compared to color positive film like Ektachrome, which is pretty damn narrow to begin with. Now if we zoom in on the film to 1:1, we can also see it's kind of soft for a 200 speed film. So for context, this is a shot of a deer on Color Mission 200. Also, to be completely unfair on this film, here is a deer shot on Ektachrome for comparison. So what do I make of this film? From a technical standpoint, it really isn't that good. It's grainy, it has low dynamic range, it's picky with exposure, and I don't care about any of that. The interesting thing about this film is not the technicals of the film itself. It's the technical achievement that it represents, which is Harman taking a massive risk to produce its first colour film. This is a massive undertaking, which they would not do if they didn't see a future in film. And that is what I like about this. It's what it represents. So hats off to Harman for taking a risk like this and actually producing a colour film. It's a pretty crazy thing to do. And while the film is technically lacking, that just means that there's loads of improvements Harman can make to this film in the future to produce something really nice. So hats off to Harman for producing this film. Now if anyone needs some salt, I got loads on me.